Doing a maintenance here. And Chris is currently drilling into the PVC pipe so that we can take a combustion analysis and get a real good reading on how this furnace is burning. This is our field piece combustion analyzer. We're going to go ahead and make sure that this is in a propane high efficiency setting. You can get zoom in on that, get real nice and close. And right now Chris is actually going to be checking for carbon monoxide. But it's frigidly cold up here, and my watch is showing 8,800 feet in elevation. Chris is currently standing on our OSHA approved bucket. Safety first. Ready on our iPads. We use iPads for entering in all the information on the equipment. We have nice checklists to kind of follow through to fill in the information. He's got a good run on that. You can see here that he's got 0 ppm of carbon monoxide. That's what we want to see, is a 0 number there. This customer did call, had an issue. The cabin did get down to 18 degrees. This furnace is definitely playing some catch up here. Luckily he's got PEX piping, and so we think that he'll be okay. So we did not install this furnace, so we are seeing a few things that are not right to code. For example, Chris pointed out right away that this gas flex here, we actually don't want to see that gas flex coming through the chassis of the equipment, because it can actually rub on the metal, and that can actually create a gas leak. So we're just going through the checklist here, entering some information in here, check all kinds of stuff here, and I'll kind of try to narrate what he's doing as he's going along here. Now we're taking a combustion analysis of the furnace here. It's going to give us some pretty cool information. We want to have at least a 15-minute run time before we actually take these readings. Our biggest thing we're looking for is carbon monoxide levels in the burn. We want to see less than 100. And we can also see the efficiency down here is 91.8%. This excess air, it looks a little high to me, but you know, with a carrier, the door is off, so it's not a true representation of the air mixture here. So you can see Chris is adding some photos to the job. He's putting a little description of what that is, the combustion analyzer, right into our files. And we got a lot of fun tools here. We got our psychrometers that are reading wet bulb, dry bulb temperatures, humidities, and we get them in both your supply and return. So we can see how the blower speed is. We're going to check static pressures, which tells us how much resistance in the ductwork. And we just kind of get that overall picture of the entire system. So it looks like we're checking, cleaning the flame sensor before and after. Looking pretty good. That's really a problematic part of the furnace, is that flame sensor, and it's very important. We do maintenance. Is something as simple as a dirty flame sensor can turn off your heat. See these little screws that are inside the in-shot burners? That is to help mix the air and the gas, and that is done on a propane conversion only. So that was done properly. So this field piece is pretty neat too. See, it's doing a little shutdown. One thing that's new to this combustion analyzer is that it actually seals the oxygen and carbon monoxide detector. It gets sealed inside there. I got you, Chris. He likes to throw things. So right there, he was just ohming out the igniter, and we like to do that to, you know, all igniters are a little different, but when we see, you know, really high ohms, it kind of indicates that the igniter might be on its way out. But it's also nice to have a record of it, so when we come back year to year, we can go back and look and see what was done the year before and see if we're seeing any change, and potentially need to change that igniter. Then we can go ahead and let the customer know. Another thing I am seeing here that we would not do on an install is this Romex that's coming out of the wall. That should be shielded. This is called our inducer motor here. This is what's helping the combustion gas process. And then of course we've got our blower motor, so those are our two motors. This is a permanent split capacitor, so a PSC motor, and it requires a capacitor to start and run that motor. That's going to be the older technology that's phased out now. You cannot buy a furnace like that anymore. We'll go ahead and check that capacitor, make sure it's at the right microfarads, and we'll, that way we can make sure that the blower motor can start and run properly. Sometimes we have them on the combustion motor as well. So he just saw 10.2 MFD, and here we can see on the rating, which is 10 UF with a plus or minus of 6% allowed. On a capacitor, you can't really mess up the wires. There are two brown wires, and it doesn't matter. As long as it's not a dual capacitor, this is a single capacitor. Either wire can go on either terminal. I'm going to test the small capacitor on top. Little discharge. Let's see what that meter's going to say on this little guy. 5.07. Probably rated at a 5?
Yes.
All right. So this little pressure switch you see on top here is actually when you do an LP conversion. So it's a propane conversion. This is checking the pressure of the incoming gas from the outdoor regulator and the LP tank. And if it drops down too low here, this will actually cut the furnace out, and see how it's actually ran through the pressure switches. So this furnace would throw a pressure switch error. If this pressure were to drop too much and you did not have this in place, the flames do not eject into the heat exchanger far enough. It can actually burn up this chamber right here. So that's why we install those. This furnace is also installed on a riser box with its own filter rack underneath. We're okay with this on smaller furnaces. If you had over a 65,000, maybe an 80,000 BTU furnace, I would not recommend that box. You need to pull your return from both the side and the bottom when you get into those sizes of furnaces. This one's probably right on the borderline of where I would use one of these, but we don't really like 1-inch filters at all. We would prefer to install a high efficiency, at least a 4-inch thick filter, which lowers the pressure. See, what happens when you put resistance under a permanent split capacitor motor is that the airflow actually slows down. The motor slows down under resistance. But all the new stuff are ECMs, we call them, electronic commutative motor or a variable speed motor. They're going to actually try to ramp up to overcome the static pressures. 1-inch filters should be a thing of the past. They seem to be fine with permanent split capacitor motors, but we're finding a lot of the furnaces, unless it's a smaller furnace, it's just not enough airflow through the filter. They're too restrictive. What happens is a lot of technicians come out and say, oh, you need a new blower motor, this one burned up. Well, charge you over $1,000 and not actually look at the problem. That problem would be high static pressures, too much resistance on the filter or the ductwork, causing that motor to ramp up to its maximum, overheating the internal components. And instead of, finding the problem versus replacing the part, we like to find the problem and then say, okay, this is what we can do to fix this problem in the future. The ECMs are multi-speed, but our variables we can actually program into many stages and speeds, which allows us to run the fan all the time when it's not heating or cooling, and that actually allows us to circulate air. At my home, I run my fan all the time. So we're getting into the gas port now. We're going to see what our outgoing gas pressure is. This is very interesting. They like their manifold pressures all the way up to 11. And all the other ones that we deal with, whether it's Lennox, Daikin, they want to be around 10. So these are different. And the fact that every altitude shown here, all the way up to 10,000 feet, is showing 11 manifold pressure. Now, we find that 11 is too much at these higher altitudes for our combustion analyzer. We tune them down just a little bit. And another problem is most of the propane providers do not set the regulators high enough to handle that outgoing pressure. So this tool Chris is using, we call a manometer. And that manometer allows us to monitor all these pressures that I've been talking about, static pressure. We typically measure in inches of water column. So that's what our manometer is set to. Now, fortunately, the way this one was set up, we cannot check incoming. We would have to back this the wrong way, which would loosen this fitting, and we definitely don't want to loosen the fitting. So we're going to go ahead and just make sure the outgoing is good. If outgoing is good, we have no reason to worry about the incoming. field piece has an app. This is going to monitor all kinds of information from us through the Bluetooth. Let's take a close look at that manometer on the camera, and we can see that we are looking at 5.02. That's less than even half of 11, right? So the customer did bring to our attention that he thought the gas pressure was low, and he's definitely right. That might have been why we were seeing some of those weird excess air numbers. We were getting way too much air into the system and not gas. So we're gonna get this started up again. I wanna put the probe over here away from the furnace, get some fresh air. What happens when our gas pressure is at half or less of what it should be? Well, you're going to get about half of what the furnace can output, right? So this furnace has been working at half its capacity. The customer's going to notice a big difference in how fast this furnace can now heat the cabin up. So here we go. We got the screw off for the adjustment here. Now, I leave this all to a professional HVAC technician. Do not try this at home. So he's going to go ahead and turn that. We're going to see this number hopefully come up and up and up. And we just hit 9. Getting real good here. It's very snowy outside. We're not going to try to go out and adjust regulators right now. We're close enough, and that this furnace is going to heat a lot better than what it was. Another problem with low gas pressure is in a high efficiency furnace is we have a primary and a secondary heat exchanger. The primary cannot get moisture in it. And if we lower that gas pressure too much, we could actually get moisture in the last path coming out of the primary. It's only supposed to condensate in the secondary. And the secondary is designed to have that happen because we get moisture in there when we get down to a certain temperature. If we get too low gas pressure, we can actually rust out the primary heat exchanger and just destroy the furnace, and it won't last very long. And that will out carbon monoxide, cracks, things like that. So up here on our combustion analysis, we've been running for a short time here, but we can see our free air has come way down. Remember, we had a lot of excess air. Our efficiency has actually come up. So now that we're burning properly, this should be up at least at 93% efficient. Could be 96, not sure. So we're seeing a lot better information here as well. And the CO has still stayed very low. I think it's even lower now. So we got the field piece hooked up, these psychrometers. Here's one of them, and we got one in the return, one in the supply. They're flipped, but it doesn't matter. We understand that this is the supply and that's the return.
Oh yeah.
But that's fine. We don't need it. We know what we're doing. So we can see our delta here is at 50.7 degrees. So that's going to be the difference between the dry bulb on the supply and the return. So the furnace is going to have a rating in there, and this is going to change a little bit more over time. That's why you really want about a 15-minute run time, but it'll get us close to where we can see 40 to 70. So, man, it must have been very low before,
right?
Way low. And so we're still in really good shape here. We want to kind of land in the middle of that rating on the furnace. So it's going to climb a little bit more and probably get right in that sweet spot. Yeah, this is all looking real good. I mean, I would like to increase the gas pressure a little more, but like I said, we're dealing with a lot of snow, and we're not going to go trudge out and find a regulator right now. We're obviously doing a lot better than what we were doing before. Not only do we have it on our checklist to make sure that all the safety stuff is done, but we always fire the furnace one last time with everything together, because one time, many years ago, I was called out to a no-heat call in the middle of the night, very tired, went up and did the work, and I actually forgot to turn this switch back on the gas valve. And if I would have tested the furnace before I left, I would have known that it wasn't working. Got all the way home, they called me back out. Nothing. That's a learned lesson right there. So very important that we check final operations at the very end with everything back the way it was. Of course, we'll tape this up to, this is a positive pressure in a high efficiency furnace. You'll have actually flue gases are coming out right now. So this is putting out some carbon dioxide in the room. It's going to be very diluted and not going to really bother us. But if this was a bad burn or gas pressures were messed up, something's going on with the burners, this could potentially really make you sick. In a 80% furnace though, with the metal vent, that's a negative pressure in that vent. So air is actually drawn into the cracks around the seams and stuff on an 80%, but 90% positive pressure. So what we're doing now is we're going to take some static pressure readings. So this is kind of what I was talking about with the filter. You get too big of a furnace on a 1-inch filter where it can only pull from the bottom. If we could have got a close up, but there's only like this much room between the blower and the housing, so there's a lot of restriction when you're just pulling from the bottom. But that's why a smaller furnace is okay, larger furnace is not okay. We would definitely, what we would do is a short riser box and let the filter be on the return side. The short filter box would allow us to pull from the side and the bottom, which gives us really low statics, good airflow into the return side, into the blower side of the furnace. So what we're doing is we're getting the supply, we're going to get the return, we're going to get the blower, and if we had an air conditioning coil on here, we would actually go below the coil and above the coil, which would give us information on the restriction across the coil. So 0.37 in the return is a bit high. What we're going to do for external static pressure is we're going to add the blower and the supply. If we had a coil, we would add below the coil and the supply. The two closest points to the blower wheel is our actual external static pressure. Okay, so we said we have a total external static pressure of 1.07. So like I talked, that's a red flag. That's too high. So what this is telling us is that the return duct and the return piping in the home is restrictive. Okay, so it's something now we know, and maybe they're, like we had a call Chris went to where the couch was up against the return on the wall. Well, that's not helpful, right? Plug in the entire wall return, and that was a big problem for the system. So one thing we could do is if our deltas are low, we could lower the blower speed 1 notch, and that would help with some of that static pressure. And I do like to write what our carbon monoxide levels were in the pipe, right on that. The customers sometimes don't understand why we're drilling holes in their ductwork, and they hear all these drills going off, like, wait a minute, what are you doing? So I like to write on them like the test port or what we read on the carbon monoxide here. You know, some people say you can't do this. We've had no issues. As long as you keep this tight around this hole, if you have it all wrinkly and everything, water could make its way out of this, but when you do this right, it's not a problem. We'll let the customer know that this return is restrictive and maybe there's a couch in the way or something like that. This is what we do this stuff for. We love, I mean, I personally enjoy just making things better all the time. It's helping people out. We're not here to lie to them. We're not here to sell them boards that don't need to be replaced. We want customers for life. So when it's ready, when it's time, you know, we're here, whatever it needs to be.